A war might break out. Though still wanted as a condemned outlaw, he hurried back to Wittenberg, where he felt he was needed. Luther settled down again here at the Black Cloister, now known as Luther Hall. His mind was still set on reforming the church, rather than dividing it. But the movement to reform the Church of Rome had gained momentum and moved beyond Luther, beyond Wittenberg, even beyond Germany, into the rest of Europe and the Scandinavian countries. But it was here that Luther and close friends like Philip Melanchthon began giving direction to this movement. The Reformation had become a turning point in history. The evangelical or Lutheran Church was born. Luther's trust in God's promise matured, leading him to his most productive years. With joy and confidence, he worked hard at building up the new church, both with music and with the written word.
Luther's literary output was stupendous, and most of it was executed in this very room. But Luther's prodigious literary production would have been of little consequence had it not been a continual disclosure of his maturing religious life. No longer confronted by the jagged lightning did he in terror scream, "Saint Anne, help me." Now he was able to say, "Whereas in life I say I die, God answers, no. In the midst of death, you live."
For his friends, and especially for his congregation at the city church, Luther wrote songs and hymns. Singing in the congregation now became a part of the worship. And to make the service more meaningful to his parishioners, the service was conducted in German rather than in Latin. Luther poured out a steady stream of books, sermons, and translations. His small and large catechisms are still in use today. And always, Luther worked with a growing confidence. Changes continued in Luther's life. Catherine von Bora, a former nun, and Martin Luther, a former monk, would be married.
Luther's views on marriage matured with his own experience. After his own marriage, he said that marriage is a much better school for character than any monastery, for here it is that one has one's corners rubbed off. He defended marriage also on the ground that it is a partnership in a common endeavor, rearing children in the fear of the Lord and in the service of the church. He was perfectly realistic about some of the difficulties in marriage, and to these he referred in connection with the wedding at Cana of Galilee attended by Jesus. Mary came to him and said, "The wine has given out." "Yes," said Luther, "that indeed is the way it sometimes is with marriage. I have known a couple at the time of their wedding infatuated, and after 6 months they wanted to be done with it all." Now notice, Jesus did not take away the water, and he does not take away the vexation in marriage. He may even increase it. But he turns the water into wine, and they only know how sweet it is who have tasted it.
Martin and Catherine had 6 children. In addition, they raised 4 orphans. In the years ahead, Luther would experience all the joys and sorrows of a family life. Dr. Bainton shares with us a moment between Luther and a daughter.
He remembered that when 5 years old, how sweet was her voice when she joined in family singing. When she was 14 years old, she was taken. As she was passing, Luther held her in his arms, and Katie stood beside, and he said, "My Lenchen, you would be happy to stay here with your father on earth, and are you ready to be with your Father in heaven? Yes, she said, as God wills. And when she was laid away, Luther said, how strange it is to know that she shall shine like the sun and the stars, and yet to be so sorrowful. My little Lenchen, I can never forget her.
Out of Luther's maturing faith came a practical preacher with exceptional insight. Here, at Luther's City Church, Dr. Bainton relives a portion of one of Luther's sermons.
Joseph was walking to Bethlehem, accompanied by Mary in an advanced stage of pregnancy. He thought there would be time to discover a place for her among relatives. A fine idea that was, says Luther. Her time came, and he tried to find room for her in an inn, and there was no room in the inn. Of course there was. There was all the room in the inn, but nobody would give up a room. Shame on you, wretched Bethlehem. You should have been burned with brimstone. And don't you people think in this congregation that if you'd been there, you wouldn't have done any better? Oh, I can just hear you saying, we would have loved to take care of the baby Jesus. We would have washed his diapers. Yes, you would. That's what you say because you know who he turned out to be. But if you'd been there, you wouldn't have done any better. And if you think you would, why don't you care for your neighbor who is Christ in your midst?
Here, in this house in the town of Eisleben, Luther's life had begun. In this church, he was baptized. Returning on a trip 62 years later, Luther took ill and died within the shadow of this very same church in which he was baptized.
In his maturity, Martin Luther interpreted baptism as a welcoming of a child into the fellowship of believers, of the people of God, and for himself throughout his entire life, a ground of assurance that the God who said, I am the Lord thy God, would never fail. One who had been baptized in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
The nature of faith, said Luther, is that we dare trust in God's love and promise. It requires of us a free surrender and a joyful daring.